Welcome to this explainer, grade 9 students of St. Paul American School, Clark. Today, we're diving straight into the anatomy of an argument. We're going to look at exactly how authors build and, refine their claims. Whether you're tackling a persuasive essay, a fiery op-ed, or a dense research paper, understanding how a writer constructs their position, that's an absolute superpower. It lets you evaluate what's actually being said beneath the surface. So here's our game plan for today. We'll hit our main objective, break down the core elements of an argument, look at a real-world climate action example, clear up a huge misconception, do a quick knowledge check, and wrap it all up with a recap. Let's get right into it. Section 1. Objective. Analyzing arguments. By the end of this explainer, you're going to be able to dissect any text like a surgeon. You'll know exactly how to spot the main claim, weigh the reasons and evidence backing it up, and this is absolutely crucial, see how the author handles opposing viewpoints to make their own argument even stronger. Moving on to Section 2. Elements of an argument. Think of an argument like a physical building. Seriously, visualizing it this way makes these abstract concepts so much easier to grasp. An essay has to be built carefully from the ground up. If you skip a step or, if your materials are cheap and weak, the whole thing is going to collapse under pressure. Let's start with the foundation, the proposition. According to the Purdue University Online Writing Lab, your proposition, or thesis statement, needs to be crystal clear, concise, and firmly defined right in the first paragraph. It's literally the anchor for the entire text. Without it, the structure just falls apart because the reader has no idea what you're actually arguing for. Okay, so once you've laid that foundation, you need materials to build the walls. If the proposition is the main claim, the evidence is the proof that gives that claim its muscle. This can be factual, logical, statistical, or even anecdotal. Basically, it's the tangible proof an author uses to say, hey, I'm not just making this up. And authors can pull this evidence from all over the place. As the University of North Carolina Writing Center points out, we're talking primary sources like original documents or secondary sources like published reviews. They might even use surveys, experimental data, or, when appropriate, personal experience. It really just depends on what's going to be most convincing for their specific audience. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Evidence never speaks for itself. You can't just drop a random statistic into a paragraph and expect your reader to do the heavy lifting. An author has to introduce the evidence, explain what it means, and then logically connect it back to the main claim. That connection, it's called the warrant. It's the mortar holding the bricks together. As a critical reader, you've always got to look for this warrant to see if the author's logic actually holds water. But look, a truly solid argument doesn't just pretend the opposition doesn't exist. That brings us to the counterclaim. This is an alternative answer or a valid objection that a thoughtful reader might raise. I mean, if a thesis is actually worth arguing, there's going to be disagreement, right? By bringing up a counterclaim, the author is anticipating those objections and tackling them head-on. Section 3. The climate action example. Let's see how all this actually works in the wild with a concrete example from the Harvard College Writing Center. In this text, the author makes a really bold proposition. They argue that personal climate activism, things like household recycling, actually distracts us from the systemic changes we need to slow carbon emissions. It's a clear, highly debatable thesis. They're promising to prove that personal activism isn't just ineffective, it might actually be making things worse. But a smart reader might push back on that, right? So the author introduces a counterclaim to acknowledge the other side. They quote Annie Lowery from The Atlantic, who argues that performative environmentalism, like carrying tote bags or putting up solar panels, absolutely does matter, because shifting social behavior eventually pressures lawmakers into changing actual laws. This perfectly captures the tension of a great argument. On one side, the author's main proposition, we need systemic change. On the other side, the counterclaim. Individual actions build the awareness needed to drive that systemic change. The author purposefully put their own claim in the hot seat. Now, to win us over, they have to evaluate this counterclaim and prove why their original stance is still the winner. So, to refine their claim, the author fires back with a rebuttal. They argue that hyper-focusing on individual action just gives massive corporations a free pass. It lets them score easy PR points for minor green initiatives, while they continue burning fossil fuels at completely dangerous rates. Boom! By addressing the objection, the author just made their original proposition so much stronger. Section 4. Misconception check. Let's clear up a massive trap that so many students fall into. You might be thinking, doesn't bringing up an opposing view give the other side way too much power? Like, if you're trying to prove you're right, why would you spend a whole paragraph explaining why someone else might be right? Doesn't that just torpedo your own foundation? No way. Actually, it's the exact opposite. Tackling a counterclaim proves you've done your homework. It shows you aren't hiding from the facts. When an author explicitly breaks down why an alternative view is flawed or out of date, they make their final proposition incredibly resilient. It basically tells the reader, look, I already thought of your objection, and here is exactly why my argument still wins. Section 5. Formative Knowledge Check. All right, let's put those analytical hats on for a second. Think back to our building metaphor. Let's say an author lays the foundation with their proposition, and then, right after, they drop in a bunch of statistics about corporate carbon emissions. What role do those statistics play in our structure? If you said evidence, you hit the nail on the head. Specifically, it's statistical evidence. But remember our golden rule about the warrant? The author can't just leave those stats sitting there in the open. They absolutely have to provide the mortar, the explanation, to connect those numbers straight back to their main idea. Section 6. Recap. We've covered a ton of ground today on how authors build, support, and refine their arguments. Moving forward, just stick to these 3 steps. First, pinpoint the proposition. Find that clear foundation. Second, evaluate the evidence and make sure the author actually provided a warrant to connect it. And third, trace exactly how they handle counterclaims to refine their final message. I want to leave you with this one final thought. A truly critical reader doesn't just read the words on the page, they interrogate the negative space. The next time an argument seems almost too perfect, ask yourself, what is this author terrified of addressing? What counterclaims did they casually ignore? What evidence mysteriously vanished? Because figuring out what isn't there is just as crucial as evaluating what is. Thanks for tuning into this explainer, and happy reading.